Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, Evan. How are you?
How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So let me ask you, what do you see the problem with politics or problems with politics in 2022?
So I started when I was on a Torrance City Council, and then I served in the state legislature for about 9 years. And now I'm in my 8th year in Congress. And for most of that time, I worked with Republicans and independents and people of all different political views. And we were able to accomplish a lot of different things. But something did change in the last 4 to 5 years. And it's the following. If I now look at an apple, for example, my Republican House colleague will say, no, that's a banana. And so when you don't agree on basic facts, it's really hard to move forward. So, for example, if I have a Republican colleague who says, the January 6th insurrection was like, quote, a normal tourist visit, unquote, I cannot work with him. Doesn't matter how civil he is, how nice he is. If he holds that view, I can't work with him.
Right. So it's interesting. The basic facts, we'll say. So how do we know? And it's funny, I ask this to a lot of people and I get different answers. What is a fact?
So that is a great question to ask. And that is what the former president wants people to think about, that only what he says is true and everyone else is lying, right? He wants people to really start questioning what they read, what they see, what they hear. And that is really hard for democracy. It's really horrible for our nation. One of the worst things the former president did was to get people to start believing all sorts of crazy things. So, for example, do I know if Hugo Chavez rose from the dead and messed with our elections and stole the election in 2020? I don't actually, right, at some better physical level know that, but I can tell you he didn't do that because he's dead. So, there are just crazy things that the former president said and that people continue to say, such as this election was stolen, that are just false, right? And even today, by the way, they cannot explain who stole the election, nor how it was done, nor how over 7 million people somehow stole this election. And they still can't explain that because it's a lie. And so, at some physical level, I can't really tell you what's a fact or not a fact, but we know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm getting all sorts of answers for this, and the question it's not that simple. Sometimes is it something that could be true and proven, right? But you can dive into it. You could say, well, what is true and proven? And science is one of the major things that are peer reviewed can tend to give a ton of credibility, for example, right? Peer reviewed studies. But I find, just coming off what you're saying, like when I ask that question, no one even has the same answer to what a fact is. So then you're like, well, if we don't even agree on our basic lexicon, then what do we do? If you think a fact is that an orange is an apple, but I think a fact is that an apple is like, generally crunchy with a tough skin and can get kind of caught in the top of your tooth, then we're going to have very different conversations. So what do we do?
So I do think it's helpful to rely on experts. I think the attack on doctors and on scientists from the former president has been very damaging. And look, at the end of the day, do I actually know, for example, how the human body works the same way a doctor would? I don't. And so I'm going to rely on a doctor or on experts who study viruses, who study vaccines, who use a scientific method, and trust them when they say, hey, look, this vaccine is going to dramatically reduce your chances of going to the hospital or dying if you get COVID. And that, there are no microchips in these vaccines. Like, do I know that for a fact? Well, no, right? Because I don't look at these vaccines under a microscope, but I can tell you there are no microchips in these vaccines. And so when people believe crazy things, it is very harmful. And I don't know if I have the best answer to how to fix that, but I think people need to open their eyes and trust experts way more than they do what they read on Facebook.
Yeah, well, reliability of information is tough. Maybe that's the conversation, right? Are you reading? What are you reading? What should people read? If it's not things that their friends share in articles that could be, written by anyone very often, unverified facts, I guess.
Right.
What do you recommend? Where do you recommend people get like the purest source of information from?
Yeah. So, for example, there's a difference between a statement that your cousin makes on Facebook versus a statement you read in a New York Times, because every article in New York Times is fact-checked, and you have multiple eyes that look at all their assertions of fact in the various articles in mainstream newspapers, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and so on. Santa Monica Daily Press, for example, fact checks its articles. Now, is it possible someone saying something in an article might say something that's not true? Sure. But that quote will be accurate. It will be Joe Smith, in fact, said X, Y, or Z. Right. And so people, I think, if they look at mainstream newspapers, at least they'll get articles that were fact-checked, and they don't have sort of known false things that are put into mainstream newspaper articles.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And there's just so much that can go wrong when people start on their quest for information. I started reading, this may sound crazy, but I started reading the actual legislature.
Ha!
Like,
good for you.
Yeah, there's just too much debate on things. And then it's like, is anyone reading the contract? I always say, like, if I was, if we were working together and we were talking about our relationship with a client, right. You're like, and then you're like, well, I don't know, is it A or B? And be like, well, did you read the contract? So in my opinion, the answer is always in the contract, or at least the purest form. That's as close as you can get, right?
Exactly.
Why don't people read the contract?
It's very small print. It has a lot of pages. That's one reason.
Not all the bills are, though. There's some bills that are just a few pages. I find that legalese is particularly confusing in general. You have to sort of really process each word.
I thought you were talking about contracts. Yes. No, I read bills.
Yes. Sorry. Legislature. Why aren't people? Yeah, that was my analogy. Why aren't people reading legislature as a source of truth? Sometimes it is only a couple pages. You do have to go through legalese, which is a whole nother conversation. But
yes. So oftentimes I'll just say, three simple words, which is read the bill, right? People often will say, this bill does X, Y, and Z, when in fact it does not. And so the best way to do this is in fact to read the actual text. Absolutely.
Yeah. And why do you think they're not doing it? It seems obvious. If you want to get to the source of the bill, why are you reading the news about a bill? It took you probably in just a couple articles time, you could actually read the actual bill. Why do you think people don't do that?
No, that's a great question. I think part of it is it's not exactly the easiest way to find the text of a bill. So sometimes people may not know how to do that. I think we have to make that easier for people to figure out how do you read the text of, every bill in Congress, for example. So sometimes they'll just read an article about the bill. Now, the better newspapers will put the link in that article to the text of the bill. So sometimes you can see the text of the bill by reading an article that has a link to it.
Right. Well, and I'll give a perfect example. Scott Wiener was recently on, and we talked about his new bill, SB 107, just because there was a lot going on about it. And some of what was going on about it was like, minors can have gender surgery under 18 kind of thing without the consent of the parent. And I'm like, well, if you read the bill, as much of in run-on sentences and legalese it is written in, it is clear that that is not what the bill says. So that I was like, how many times are we getting confused? How much confusion do you think is from people just not getting to in this case, the root source of just what the bill says?
So part of it is confusion. Another part is maliciousness. You do have various folks that will intentionally misrepresent what bills do or don't do. And so that's unfortunate. It's not particularly new. That's been happening, for decades, if not centuries, where people misrepresent what legislation actually does. So the best way to break through that is really just to read the actual bill yourself.
All right. So we can kind of stamp that as like a good takeaway from today. Hey, people, if you want a pure source of information, read the bill.
Yeah, it's all publicly available, right? All legislation is public, and it's something that's done publicly.
I think if you type the bill number, it's the first thing that comes up on Google. So it's not actually that hard to find.
It should be, exactly.
Yeah. Maybe we need some legalese lessons, like how to read legalese that the government can provide for people who don't like reading. I don't know. A lot of this, I think, contributes to this lack of trust in politicians in general, right? There seems to be this trust issue. And, it's my intention to help rebuild trust between government and its people, its residents, its citizens, whoever frequents these spaces and can understand how the people that manage it, and that you can trust them. And why do you think there is to me, this is one reason that just makes things confusing, but why do you think there is a lack of trust today? And maybe there was in the past too. I'm sure there was plenty, but why today?
I think one main reason is the former president. He lied more than any other elected official ever has in U.S. history. And he was a national figure. And when you lie the amount that he does, it starts to blur the distinction between what is true and what is false. And that leads us down the road to authoritarianism. I mean, even today, right, he still promotes a big lie that somehow the election was stolen. It was not stolen. Multiple court cases have said it was not stolen. Multiple audits in multiple states have said it was not stolen. I mean, it's just a lie when he says it. And so when the former president of the United States, right, the leader of the free world, lies at that rate on big things and small things, that is incredibly damaging to our country. And there's no both sides to this. It's not as if, people on both sides lie equally. There is one side and particularly one person that lies way more than anybody else.
Yeah. And the degree you're saying it's not 50-50. You're talking about between Democrats and Republicans?
That is correct.
And
that's correct.
And you're saying his influence has created even more of that on the Republican side, so that it's now the imbalance is what percentage?
Correct.
How much do Democrats lie and how much do Republicans lie?
The assertion that the 2020 election was stolen is the big lie.
Sure.
And it's just false. Even his former attorney general has come out publicly and privately and said, quote unquote, that it was bullshit, the election conspiracy theories. And, I'm not a great fan of the former attorney general, but he did come out and was very strong and clear on that. But it's not even that. It's on issues such as climate change. Now, look, am I a climate scientist? No, but I can read. And when 96% or so of all the scientists in the world say, look, climate change is happening, this is what's going to happen. And you see that, in fact, what they said was going to happen, in fact, is happening. Then you pretty much conclude that, yeah, climate change is not a hoax perpetrated by China. And so if, MAGA folks are going to believe that, it's a problem, right? And so, again, I think the attack on experts has been very damaging. I wish people would trust experts more, because there's a reason that they're experts, because they learned their subject matter over many years, and they are just going to have more knowledge than you will. And so now, should you always trust experts? Well, you don't always trust them, but when most of them believe the same thing, then it's a pretty good indicia that you should probably accept what they're saying as largely true.
Yeah. Have you ever read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell?
I did. That was a cool book. Yeah.
It was cool. It's relevant to this conversation at the moment.
Yes.
He talked about that a little bit, right? That when to not trust expert, when your instinct, right? When there is, right. I don't know if that pertains to most of these conversations, but I did think that was an interesting book. He's quite an author. He gets you to think.
He does. Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, if you had to recommend one fix for Democrats and one fix for Republicans, what would it be?
That's a great question. I've actually never been asked something like that before. So let me think about this. So I think on Republicans, my fix would be, look, it's okay to support someone if, they believe in things that you believe in. But when that person just lies, you just have to call it out, right? Or if the person says things are racist and horrible, you have to call it out. And so my fix for Republicans is they just show much more spine so that when the former president of the United States makes fun of Mitch McConnell's wife because of her ethnicity, you got to slam him. You have to say, you do not make fun of Asian Americans and their names based on, our ethnicity. And Republicans just don't do that. It's like a cult. Whatever it is a former president does or says must be true or must be right. And so that is just very alarming to me. On the Democratic side, I do think often when faced with a problem, we offer 27 different solutions, and it's very confusing and hard for someone to sometimes understand because most people don't pay attention to politics. They're busy. They have lots of things to do. And a lot of times we don't come in with sort of a very understandable, easy solution for folks. I think we have to work on that.
Very interesting. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I know you're a technophile.
Recovering computer science major.
I have a similar background. So I call a lot of times the way that life kind of presents itself, or the way that governments create bureaucracy, or big corporations. I call it a bowl of spaghetti. The term spaghetti code, obviously.
Right.
So
you made me notice my laptop, which needs to get charged. So hang on 1 second. All right. I'm gonna plug it in, make sure it doesn't go off. There we go.
Notice it. There we go. Spaghetti code. How is the government like spaghetti code? And what are some of the things you're doing that can help reduce, well, one, the problem that you just mentioned, right? How can technology be support in exactly what you just said? And everything else like the DMV.
So I think it's important for folks to understand the government is not set up like a business, nor like the private sector. Government is not designed to be efficient. It is designed to have lots of people's voices be heard, right? So in businesses, it's pretty much the opposite. Businesses are not designed to have lots of voices to be heard. It's designed to make a profit, be very efficient, and to execute that way. But the way we work in government is we let lots of people voice their opinions. We let lots of people, introduce bills and then make amendments to bills. And then we have committee hearings where we talk about the issue. We'll bring in subject matter experts. We'll bring in, ordinary Americans. We'll bring in all sorts of different folks who then provide their opinions, right, to members of the legislature. And then it goes through not only a committee, but it has to go through the floor of the House. Let's say it's a House bill. And then it has to go through the U.S. Senate, where there could be, Senate committee hearings. And it has to go through the floor of the Senate. And then executive branch gets to weigh in. And, the president gets to decide whether to sign that bill or not. And so that's not a very efficient process, right? No business would operate like that. But we do it because we believe that government has a different function. And the function is to let lots of people have their voices heard. And hopefully their good ideas win out through that process.
Sure. Well, I know, technology can solve lots of these problems. There are things that are obviously like easy to solve with an online form, right? And there's, of course, it can also solve to help make us more democratic without some of the bottlenecks. And I know you have the App Association, right? I actually have a good friend, Mark Fisher with Dogtown Media, who is a judge for the Congressional Challenge there.
Congressional App Challenge, yes.
Yep.
So this is something I do annually, and we invite high school students to write an original app and submit it. And the creativity among our students is amazing. It gives me a lot of hope for the future. And then we have a panel of judges who will look at the various apps that are submitted. And they also have to basically do a video and sort of explain, right, what the app does. And then we give out congressional awards based, on the winners. And so it's something that's also done nationally with other members of Congress. And the number one winner will then go to DC and basically present their app. And it's pretty cool in Washington, DC, when this happens, because you have all these folks from all across America with their super cool app, and people get to walk around and look at what these apps do. And so it's a very neat program.
What are some of the categories that these apps kind of focus on?
Oh, it's all over the place. So some of the apps are games. Some might, help you navigate different locations. Some might, help you buy groceries easier. There's all sorts of different apps that do all sorts of different things. Some help you with homework assignments. So it is different every year.
So can we use certain, are there initiatives that are focused on using technology that you know of, or that work, or that are still being built, or that don't work?
So technology has made it much easier for the legislature to be transparent. So, for example, 100 years ago, it would actually be sort of hard to figure out, when legislature introduces a bill, what's in that bill, right? Now you can pretty much instantly go online and read it. So that has been good, that the information is much more accessible now. In addition, with social media, it's much easier to communicate with your state or federal legislator or staff. 60 years ago, imagine trying to talk to, a member of Congress. You have to make the phone call, get through the various staff in that office, try to set up a time to have a phone conversation with a member of Congress. It wasn't all that easy. Now, through Facebook and Twitter, I will have direct conversations with constituents. And it does, I think, make legislators more accessible in a way that wasn't true even just a few decades ago.
Yeah. So accessibility and information dissemination, you'd say, are the two things that it really helped.
Yes. And it's also much easier, right, to send an email to your state or federal or local elected official than to handwrite a letter, put a stamp on it, and mail it.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, that is true. Can we use it to create more fairness?
I think you can use it to create more input from more people across America. And so now anyone, right, can find the email address of my district or capital office and send an email, and a member of my staff will read it. And so we're able to, I think, accumulate a lot more voices from across the country and across my district compared to, a few decades ago. Fairness is sort of an interesting question, because you can also get flooded with emails. And so if someone has a bunch of money and wants to decide to contact a lot of legislators, they're able to do it in a way that someone who doesn't isn't able to. So I think it goes both ways.
Sure. Well, I've seen examples where, the cost of democracy is high, right? It's expensive to be truly democratic. Technology can make it less expensive. And it also can sometimes not get you what you want. There is a great example. I'm going to tell you a fun story. It's not that fun, but there is a mural on the corner of Lincoln and Olympic here in Santa Monica that went through, that needed to be repaired. And it was looking really bad for like a decade or two, and they wanted to repair it. And they took 8 years to have conversations, neighborhood meetings, brought in the artist to have a conversation about it, renamed it the Barack and Michelle Obama school. And they turned this really a beautiful, what was originally a beautiful mural. It was dilapidated, I guess, why we were trying to change it. There was design competitions and iterations. And I can't even 8 years, I think, maybe 7. You know what it is today? A beige wall. Just a big beige wall, just a long, empty beige wall. No one got anything.
It's a great story.
I as someone who believes in democracy, I always see stuff like that. And I'm like, there's flaws in democracy. How do we know when these flaws are helping? How do we know when we're getting hurt by too much democracy in cases like that, which now there's nothing there. Now no one gets to enjoy anything. So 8 years of work and effort and time and labor and energy of hundreds and hundreds of people. How do we know?
That's a great question. And I'm a great believer in democracy, not because I think it's an amazing system, but because I think it's better than any other alternative. So clearly, an authoritarian system is much more efficient, right? China is much more efficient at what it wants to do. So in China, if they want to, build a bullet train, they're just going to do it. And they don't care about property rights. If you're living there, too bad. They're just going to force you out. If it's going to cause environmental damage, they don't care. They're going to build that bullet train, and it's going to, be built. So there are certain things that authoritarian systems can do better than democracies. Now, I still prefer democracies because I would rather have voices be heard, property rights protected, the environment protected. Democracies also have a way of self-correcting and of learning from mistakes. So, for example, the United States engage in a totally racist and horrific violation of constitutional civil rights when they interned over 100,000 Americans who happen to be of Japanese descent. Now, the U.S. Congress, many years later, apologized for that. And Ronald Reagan signed a legislation that gave reparations to the victims of that internment. The Chinese Exclusion Act also happened early in our country's history. and it was totally discriminatory against people that look like me. The U.S. Congress, through a bill by Congresswoman Judy Chu, also apologized for that racist and indefensible act. So democracies do have a way of correcting in a way that authoritarian regimes do not, because, President Xi or Vladimir Putin, they're never going to punish themselves, right?
Right.
And they're never going to, say that what they did last week was wrong. They will never do that.
Right. Well, it's interesting. If you get down to maybe more of a smaller level, like at local level, there's authoritarianism at some level everywhere, right? Like if you're a CEO of a business, you're an authoritarian. I guess ideally you're a team player and you believe in, building a culture of trust and support and communication and taking a lot of, different ways of looking at things. And that's how you build your organization. But ultimately, a decision will come to you or the chairman of the board or whoever. You could say very often, a city manager runs a city, has a lot of unilateral approaches to things, and then executes. And taxpayer dollars are used for some of those decisions. So I guess, and we accept that. We believe that that's probably where authoritarianism is probably the wrong word for that. But it's where democracy stops to some degree. You can't have democracy on every issue, which pothole to fix, right? We've drawn a line. Potholes, we don't ask the public which potholes they need to fix. That's not, sorry guys, everyone's accepted that. So we've almost, like as a society, started to accept where we don't need democracy. And
that's a very good point. That is a very good point. And people smarter than me are going to figure out where's the best place to draw that line. But you're very right. There are lines that are drawn all the time as to when we have public input and when we do not. Because if we do have public input on everything, then nothing would ever happen, and we just have beige walls everywhere, right?
That's right. Ugly wall syndrome.
Right.
That's what I call it. May every wall be beautiful. So, and I find, a lot of this gets, even some of these smaller things, like at the local level, get caught in how the local media portrays issues. They read, we can get back to like thinking about facts, but like, even at the local level, we can't get to the bottom. Like there's two sides here in Democraticville, Santa Monica. I think it's like 80% of people. You have like different sides of democracy, right? Like maybe farther left and like moderate left. And we still can't get to the bottom of a lot of these things. And the narrative is part of this, right? People creating narrative for sometimes their own self-interest or for a bunch of other reasons. But a lot of what happens is it creates unrest, and people there's a lot of ad hominem attacks, personal attacks. We forget that humility as a civic virtue is important, and that people come from different walks of life and that they may see things differently. And maybe there's two rights. Do you believe often that there are two rights, and how at the local level can we even be thinking about campaign season when it comes to this kind of conversation?
So that's a very good point you make. And I do think that folks should, probably at the local level, understand that their local elected officials are largely volunteers, right? They're not in this to make money. Your city council member in Santa Monica is not doing it as a way of making sure that they get food on the table. That's not why they're doing this, right? They're doing this because they believe in public service and they want to make sure that Santa Monica is a great place to live, work, and play. So if people sort of start from that perspective, that people really are trying to serve the public, I mean, you wouldn't go through the hassle of running for city council if you didn't, at least in your mind, want to help do good, because it's just not worth it. Now, you may disagree on different issues and have different viewpoints, And I think people should try to work out various solutions to various issues, and people can disagree on, the best way of getting to a particular goal. But I think everyone is in it for generally the right reasons.
I would agree with that. And we're all neighbors here. So it's like you got neighbors versus neighbors, and it's weird, and it seems not called for. It feels that people are particularly angry over really first world problems, like as first world as problems can get. That said, there are some things that are universally not first world problems, and public safety and homelessness is a real problem. So there is things like that, but it does seem like everyone wants to solve these problems, and all of the values and aspirations are the same, but the approach is different. And some people think the solution to homelessness is mental illness first versus housing. But I haven't met anyone who doesn't think housing isn't part of the conversation, for example.
Right.
Everyone believes that there's some degree of housing. It just depends on how much. So, and when and where and how. And because of that, there's that's the big one here, one of the big ones here, right? That there's like a war in a sense. And they're smearing each other. They're spending money hating each other and smearing. And it's so sad as a community. What do we do to change that?
So part of it, I think, is when there's not enough resources, right? That causes conflict and people to get into different political fights. So at the federal level, we've done a relatively decent job with veterans who happen to be homeless. And that's because there was a pretty good federal program called the HUD-VASH voucher, where we provide housing plus the VASH part, which are services. So while homelessness has spiked across the board in California and in places like Santa Monica, it hasn't really spiked among veterans who happen to be homeless. So what I'd like to do is expand that kind of program to everybody else. And my view is just because the federal government hasn't been that involved with homeless people who aren't veterans doesn't mean we shouldn't. And so Senator Feinstein and I have introduced legislation that would provide basically $4 billion over 5 years to local cities and counties to address homelessness and provide services to people who are homeless. And I think we need to just get more resources to cities and counties to address this problem. Now, with any relatively large population, there's always a lot of different reasons for why someone is homeless. So some of it may be mental illness. Some of it could be that they're working, but they can't pay the rent, and so they're homeless. So you have a number of working people who are homeless. You also have people who may be homeless because of drugs. You may have people who are homeless because they're in between jobs and they just didn't have the amount of money to stay in their apartment. But if they were given some assistance, they could sort of transition back to society relatively quickly. And then you have some people who, for whatever reason, have lost their total support structure, right? When someone is homeless, they have no family helping them, no friends helping them, no colleagues helping them. And it's all these different issues that they're struggling to deal with. And it's really hard to have any single program help all these folks. So I basically support lots of different programs that help lots of different kinds of people who happen to be homeless.
Yeah. And I think everyone really wants to do that. I can't understand why the vitriol around this. Do you think the facts are clear around what the root cause of homelessness is?
So this is an interesting issue because everyone has the same shared goal, right? Everyone wants to reduce homelessness, right? There's no one walking around and says, hey, I want to increase homelessness. Right? So everyone has exactly a shared goal, but there are lots of different views of how we get there. and some of it are factual disputes. So it would matter if you happen to believe that people are homeless for X reason only versus someone else who might believe it's for Y reason. You might actually have very different views on what to do. So, I think the facts not only may matter, but the facts may also not be that easy to ascertain because it's somewhat hard, right, to figure out with a large population exactly why people are homeless.
Right.
There was lots of different issues.
Yeah. I mean, this is tough because there's a civil war, if you will, a vocal civil war here. But, all I can think is if we can't get to the bottom of like the local stuff, whether it's, homelessness is a big one. It's a regional issue. It's a national issue. But, about a development, like a building that is getting built and the different concerns around that and whether it should be a park or a building. Like if we can't get to the bottom of that and get our facts straight, how, when you start getting even more removed, because at the local level, you're pretty in touch. You can go to meetings, you can get very close to source information. At county, right. State, federal level, you're getting real far removed. You are not in the room where it happens. Right?
That's right.
There's ulterior motives. People are saying what they want you to hear very often, not what actually the conversation was about. And it scares me sometimes. Like the level of polarization right now is so strong. You start to think like, is a civil war possible? And it's scary. I think a lot of people have that sort of a little bit of that thought, at least conversations I've had. We don't want to get there. So my question for you is that possible? Are we on that track? Or what do we need to do to believe that we're all on the same team?
I think you asked a very important question. Prior to January 6th, I really didn't think that was possible. The January 6th insurrection, where you had all these people show up and literally brutalize police officers and attack law enforcement in their insane desire to go into the Capitol and stop the certification of Joe Biden as president. That was very highly, deeply disturbing. It was a violent series of actions. And a lot of these, actually, most of those were just regular Americans that got caught up in the lies that Donald Trump put out, believed them, and then somehow thought that they were being patriots by attacking our own Capitol to install Donald Trump illegitimately as president. And so if people believe that and are able and willing to take violent action to execute it, that is really troubling. And so we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. I think this November's elections are going to be important because not only do you have control of the Congress and the Senate at stake, but also you got a lot of state races where you have election deniers running for governor or running for Secretary of State. That is really troubling. It's really bad for democracy if an election denier gets elected to a very high level of office.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this to me still sort of like there's a lot of it that sounds like even with like climate deniers, like I don't know any climate deniers. I know people who think that climate isn't the first priority, similar to homelessness, right? It's like, no, it's important. We need to be responsible. We need to do all these important things, move to clean energy, but they don't believe that it's as important as the economy, for example, right? So that's not in their vernacular. It's not in their conversation. But the narratives that we're given tend to be as if the climate deniers, and I'm curious to know if you agree with this, but that's like a fringe case. These are extreme people, and that most people don't believe that these extreme type of things. We get lost in the extremism of the narrative. Most people, I believe, are or moderate, which was this 99% thing that was going on for a while, right? Why are we so hung up on the extremes? And what if it is the case that most people are moderate? Why is our culture adapted to this and normalized it? We're following extreme conversations. Shouldn't we be following moderate conversations?
So this is the best way I can answer that. I think you're accurate and correct that most people believe in climate change and that they believe humans either have a significant role or at least some role in causing it. The US Senate and the US Congress are not like that. So the best way for me to explain this is the Republican elected officials in the House of Representatives and the Senate are pretty fringe on the climate change issue, pretty extreme. You can just read their statements. A number of them do not believe in climate change or believe that it's naturally occurring, or believe that, maybe there is climate change, but there's nothing to do about it. I mean, that's why you don't have a lot of things happen on climate. And that's why it basically took Democrats on a party line basis to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate change project in U.S. history. Not a single Republican voted for it.
Huh. So how do we get past all this? You've mentioned, a fix for Dems and a fix for Republicans, but do we need to get our facts straight? How are we going to move forward in this?
So I think continuing to tell the truth is helpful, right? And so 30 years ago, people didn't really know what, climate change was or is. 20 years ago, you had a lot of people denying it. But now, right, particularly the younger generation, people understand it's real. And so part of that shift in the public opinion is because people just kept telling the truth about climate change. And most people, in fact, do trust experts. And most people do believe in physics and chemistry and biology and, the laws of nature. And I'll give you one fact that I found interesting. So last year, if you watched the media and you saw all these anti-vaxxers, protesting at school boards, other places, you would think, wow, a lot of people, don't believe these vaccines. And then I remember, I was on a phone call with the LA County chief medical officer earlier this year. And I said, so how many people, are vaccinated in LA County? And the person said, well, if you, don't count people under 12, about 85%. I was like, whoa, that's a really high number. Which sort of tells me that most people are not ideologically opposed to vaccines. Most people actually trust scientists, and most people don't want to die from COVID. So it's a relatively small handful of people that have this outsized voice. And of that 15%, I don't think all 15% are also vaccine deniers. I think a number of them either don't have access to it, or it's hard for them to get the shot, or so on. So I think the relative percentage of people that sort of are vaccine deniers is probably pretty small. So that gave me some hope. And with climate change, I think you're going to reach that stage where it's really a small minority that think it's, being caused by China.
And even actually, you make a good point here. And, one of the things that I see is I don't think I've yet to meet an anti-vaxxer. This is another one of those language things.
Well, I have met them, but anyways, go ahead.
I'm sure they're out there. I guess in however I interact, I don't meet people who are like no to vaccines. There is some people that seem to be no to this vaccine. And this gets back to like where you're getting your data from and why is that? And if it's really a comorbidity and obesity majority issue, then why am I trying this mRNA vaccine? So I think that's the logic that I'm seeing, not necessarily no vaccinations, but like mRNA is a new thing. It's
Right.
a wonderful technology. And I guess they don't want to be guinea pigs in a sense, maybe. So
right.
That's just what I'm hearing. So the reason I'm bringing it up is because it kind of goes back to that climate denier is in the same category for me as like anti-vaxxer.
Right.
And sometimes that we have this tendency of categorizing people that makes us feel better or puts people in camps. And actually, some of them aren't that far off. Most people I know got vaccinated, but that's the sentiment that I saw most of the time.
So what you said is absolutely fair. So I think people can take the view that they don't want to try sort of new technology. Now, if you do talk to them, you should let them know there are vaccines that were done on the traditional basis, like the vaccines they got for measles or mumps or so on.
Yeah.
They're not mRNA vaccines. So I'd be curious if they will take those vaccines. But it does go to this other point, which I think is interesting about COVID, is it wasn't, imagine if COVID operated like Ebola with a 1 week latency period. Everybody would be wearing masks. Everyone would be vaccinated, right? Because Ebola is so deadly. But COVID, right, wasn't like that. It was sort of in this gray area where, it's true that 99% of the people who got it are going to survive. So people start to make their own risk calculations. Now, that does depend on age group. If you're older, it's going to be less than that. But, if you're a healthy 35-year-old, you might make a risk calculation that's different than, what government thinks is the best to protect everyone from dying or getting very sick. And I think that caused a lot of conflict in society. It was sort of like this interesting gray area that COVID hit right in the sweet spot where people started to make their own risk calculations.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And because it wasn't as deadly and they thought that was an opportunity. A lot of the times I thought like the society is aware of the risk at their own level. And if you're willing to take that risk, but then the conversation is like, it's not about you, it's about everyone, right? I mean, that's the kind of alternate viewpoint.
Right.
But,
and the problem is, right, if let's say, it's a 1% lethality rate applied to a country as big as the United States, that is a huge amount of people, right? So that's why, government took the steps that it took.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things so before there was vaccines, and I remember like in my community meetings and on, social media a bit, I was sharing a lot about like, hey, we don't know when the vaccines are coming, but the best thing you can do is start to like eat well, learn about nutrition and learn about exercise and start exercising daily, some degree. Start sweating every day because the best thing you can do is have a strong immunity. That's the best thing you can really do, right? Like if you're healthy,
right.
There's basically
and that's
no
good
risk.
for a whole variety of other reasons, right? So
what's that?
That's good for a whole variety of other reasons.
Right. Yeah.
You absolutely should exercise and eat healthy. It'll prevent all sorts of different diseases from happening to you. Yep.
Yeah. And I was frustrated because I'm like, I don't understand why aren't governments saying, hey, make sure you exercise, like exercise. This is important. You need to eat well, stop eating sugar, start sweating every day and learn about these things while we're sitting at home, not going to the office. So I was trying to be that guy for a little while.
Good for you. Good for you.
Thank you. And I just never knew why. I didn't get any messaging. I didn't see it from the CDC. I didn't see it locally. I didn't see it federally. This. It feels like most people know this. Why do you think it wasn't like no one recommended that?
I think, government does recommend that, but I think people sort of tune that out. And I think people know they're supposed to exercise. It's just that it's hard, right? A lot of people don't like to exercise. And, so I think it's more that than anything else. I think most people know that they're supposed to exercise and exercise is a good thing. They don't want to do it because it's not like eating a donut, right? Eating a donut is much more pleasurable.
There's some discipline required.
Yes.
You gotta care. And I was like, well, you're not driving to work. Use that time. You did not drive to work today. So you can go put it on a YouTube video for 20 minutes. There's tons of them. Great.
Yes.
20-minute videos, high
Right.
intensity. So I don't know. I still recommend that for people, but.
No, that's good. I mean, if everyone in the U.S. exercised more, it would bring down healthcare costs. Absolutely.
Well, here's to a healthier U.S., I suppose, so we can all exercise a bit more. I really enjoyed this conversation. I thank you for really exploring kind of all the angles of these complex issues, and taking the time to help people think about perhaps how we can treat each other just a bit better.
Well, thank you for advocating that. That is absolutely a good thing.
Anything you want to leave everybody with today as a final note?
I just thought I'd maybe give some words of optimism about our institutions, because some of what we talked about today was sort of dark, right? So I want people to understand what happened with the Mueller report and what it was, right? It was an investigation of a president who was Republican, led by someone who was Republican, at a time when Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. And that investigation was allowed to go to its completion, largely without interference. That's pretty remarkable. I don't think many countries would have been able to do that. And so I think people should understand that our institutions are strong, they held, and people should have faith in their institutions.
Yeah, I like that. I think there is some degree of hope and faith that's important to know that the U.S. is a great country, whether you think it's the best country in the world or second or fifth. Best,
but yeah.
Well, outside of my personal beliefs, whatever people think, I do believe they should realize that, and I'll just say, like, if you want to make change, the system is sort of set up for making change, and it starts locally. And if you try to get all crazy about federal politics and just share nonsense and get hung up in the morning about this stuff, then you just sort of destroy your brain and you don't take a lot of action. But if you focus locally, you can make great change. Your vote is 1-to-1. There is no electoral college. You can support local candidates, and you can do things in your own backyard that are important. Learn about how recycling works, learn about how your streets work, how things get fixed. And because of that, I love the American system. It doesn't mean it's fair all the time, and it doesn't mean you don't have to deal with life stuff, but like the system is built for improvement and progress. That's how I see it.
Absolutely. And, when I came here, we were poor and we started living in the very same person's home. And my parents would go to flea markets and sell gifts and jewelry to make ends meet. Now I'm a member of Congress. And my story is not unique. It's the same story that's replicated across millions of people, generation after generation. And there are very few countries like America that allow this to happen. And it's still an amazing place. And just one last thing to think about, if you're a great entrepreneur and you want to start a business and you have a great idea, would you want to, for example, go to China, where the government could just kidnap you if they think you're being too successful? Do you want to go to Russia, where people get pushed out of high-rise buildings by the government of KGB agents and so on? You wouldn't do that, right? But you might go to Santa Monica, right? You might locate here in California. So I think over the long term, the United States not only is an exceptional country, but will remain that way, especially compared to our peer competitors.
Yeah. Sir, I thank you for your time, and thank you for being someone who stands for what they believe in and taking the hard road of being a politician. It's hard. It's not an easy thing, and you have the courage to go and do that that most people don't. So whatever side of aisles people are on, I often like to thank people for their service of being, of doing the difficult job of being a politician. So it's hard.
Thank you so much, Evan. I had a lovely time today with you.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right.